Hey there and welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 64. And today we're going to be diving into a topic that hits close to home for so many of us, and that is how to break free from destructive behaviours. And we're going to be using NLP to help you do that. So whether it be procrastination, self-sabotage, overeating, or the many other habits that just don't serve you anymore, you know the ones, those patterns that you know aren't good for you, but you keep falling into them anyway. We're going to be taking a look at how to not only manage these behaviours and patterns, but how to move beyond them for good. So grab a cuppa or whatever you do when you're listening to your podcasts, and let's get started. Hey there and welcome to the Stress Less Living podcast. My name is Stephen Burns and I've been a practicing coach, trainer and hypnotherapist for 25 years. Each week I'll share easily digestible bite-sized ideas that you can immediately put into practice so that you can live a more harmonious and balanced life. Because life is challenging, but whatever we encounter, we always have a choice. We can take the easy routes or the hard routes, the low stress way or the high stress way. Well, the Stress Less Living podcast is about always looking for the easy routes in life, the low stress ways to accomplish your goals, get more of what you want, and ultimately live a happy and more effortless life. So if you're looking for the perfect antidote for the chaos of modern life, my friend, you are absolutely in the right place. So before we dive into the techniques, I want to first unpack why destructive behaviours happen in the first place. So there's three things worth mentioning here. The first is what I call the subconscious connection. So most destructive behaviours aren't conscious choices, right? They're ingrained patterns running in the background on autopilot, and they're often developed as coping mechanisms too in response to past experiences. So for example, if you procrastinate, then maybe you're procrastinating because deep down you're afraid of failure or even what success might bring. Perhaps you've gone after something in the past that was meaningful and it worked out terribly. You were mildly traumatized. So the procrastination is a way to avoid facing those fears. And this is a good thing to be aware of because often when we're doing something that we don't want to do, something we want to stop, our attention is drawn to the behavior itself. But you want to look beyond the surface and explore what is the subconscious connection that I've made that's actually bringing this behavior into play in the first place. That is one of the real keys to changing that behaviour for good. So that's the first thing that's worth paying attention to. The second thing is kind of an extension to that, and that's something called secondary gain. And this one is massive. So secondary gain is how we benefit from staying the same. So almost always a destructive behaviour has a hidden benefit, one that we don't realise is there, but it absolutely is hiding in the background, driving that behaviour. And that's the thing that often keeps people stuck. So to give you an example, so there's a great TV programme, I think it's still on Netflix if you want to check it out. It's called Beyond the Curve. So it's a documentary on the flat earthers. So these are people who believe that the world is not a globe, it's not round. It is in fact flat with a big Game of Thrones style wall of ice at the end to stop us from falling off. So throughout the programme, they interview flat earthers and they basically debunk all of the beliefs that they have. But the thing that's mind-blowing about this is that even in the face of irrefutable proof that the world is in fact a globe, they manage to bend and twist things to deny it and reaffirm their own beliefs that it is in fact flat. And one of the things that keeps them in this belief system is secondary gain. So many of them are misfits. They've been rejected and pushed to the outskirts of society. And by joining the Flat Earth movement, they get this huge sense of belonging. And you can see it in the documentary. It makes them feel like they're part of something meaningful. That's the hidden benefit. That's the secondary gain. So if they were to change their beliefs and their behaviour, they would lose that sense of belonging. And that's really important to them. So guess what? They just don't change what they think and how they behave. And there's actually another even more dramatic example of it in the documentary. So the guy who created the flat earth concept is basically now a celebrity in that sphere. So he travels all around the world giving paid talks, he sells merchandise, and he's made a lot of money out of it. I think I'd heard he was practically a millionaire. So to change his behaviour and his beliefs, he would have to give up all of that status, all of that wealth, all of that significance. And guess what? he's not going to do that. It's definitely a lot to lose. So that is secondary gain in action. So as a starter, it can be really useful to ask yourself, what might I lose as a result of changing? And how can I preserve that while I do change? You get the answer to that latter question there. It's going to make such an incredible difference because secondary gain is the thing that keeps you stuck. And the third thing that's worth taking into consideration is your beliefs and identity. So often destructive behaviours are tied to limiting beliefs or identity statements. So things like, I am just not good at staying organised, or I'm terrible at staying consistent, or once a smoker, always a smoker, or I have an addictive personality, or something like that. So the thing is, I understand why people say these things. I say those things myself from time to time. It's because they've had experiences in the past that back them up. But the reality is they've made massive generalizations. They're not reflective of your potential as a human being. Plus, if you keep describing yourself using those terms, they will become self-fulfilling prophecies. It's like that famous Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. So it's good to be aware of how you describe yourself in relation to these behaviours. And if you notice these toxic belief statements or statements about your identity, then stop saying them. Stop describing yourself in those terms. You're so much more than that. So that's a few things to consider as a starter. Let's now take a look at a simple but very powerful step-by-step process that can help you break the cycle and change these destructive behaviours. Also, if you want more information about this step-by-step process, this technique, I do go into it in a lot more depth in my Brain Trainers Academy. I'll include a link to that in the show notes. You do get a special discount as a podcast listener. So, let's go for this technique. So step number 1, identify the trigger and the pattern. So the first step is always awareness. It's very difficult to change something that you're not aware of unless you're going through some sort of deep hypnotic process. So you want to first of all ask yourself, what is the behaviour I want to change? And also, when and where does it happen? What triggers it? Is it a specific event? Is it an emotion? Is it a thought? Is it something that you see, something that you hear, or something that you feel in terms of a touch? So let's take an example. Say you wanted to stop stress eating. So you reach for the cookie jar when you get stressed and you're finding that you're packing on the pounds. You want to stop doing it. So maybe on some reflection, you notice that there are certain times when it happens. Perhaps it's late at night after a long day at work. You're fine during the day, but as soon as you sit down on the couch and reach for the TV remote, boom, the thought enters your head, maybe I could have a bowl of ice cream, or the cookie jar starts to call to you, Stephen, eat me. By the way, cookie jars don't really speak. I'm just making a wee joke, but I'm sure you get the picture. So there will be certain times and places that will trigger that behaviour. So your first step is to figure out what those things are. Then when you've got that, you can write them down on a piece of paper if you like, but the key thing is just to be aware of them. Once you've got that, you then move on to step 2, and this is where you uncover the positive intention. So the thing is, behind every behaviour, even the destructive ones, there is a positive intent. It's trying to get something good for you. In fact, often it is getting something good for you. And this is where you're starting to get into the realms of secondary gain, that concept I mentioned earlier on. So you want to ask yourself, what is this behaviour trying to do for me? Or what's the hidden benefit here? What is the secondary gain? What am I attempting to preserve here by staying the same? Or what might I lose if I do actually change? These are really great, powerful questions. So for example, if we stick with the stress eating, positive intention might be seeking comfort or to feel safe. It's the classic comfort eating. Or if you drink excessively, what is it that gives you that's important? Is it a feeling of letting go, a feeling of relaxation, a feeling of having fun, or a sense of belonging? Maybe you drink down the pub with your mates and that's how you connect, how you socialise. So this step isn't about justifying the behaviour, right? It's about finding the why behind it, the driving force, so that you can address that. Once you know what the subconscious mind is attempting to achieve, you can meet that need in a healthier way, one that doesn't involve that destructive behaviour. So once you've got that, you then want to move on to step 3, and this is where you look to interrupt the pattern. So destructive behaviours thrive on repetition. So to break the cycle, you need to interrupt that pattern. So you want to interrupt the pattern at the trigger point. So if you recall from step 1, you became aware of what was triggering that behaviour, when and how it started. So now that you know that, when that trigger happens, you want to be aware of it and you want to do something different at that point, just to mix it up, to scramble it. Are you someone who struggles with work-life balance? You find it difficult to maintain harmony between career ambitions and your personal well-being. You're doing your best to balance demands and deadlines with the other important aspects of your life, but things like burnout, stress, and a nagging sense of guilt seem to forever lurk in the background. Well, one of the best first steps that you can do to create more balance is to do a full life audit. This is a powerful process that helps you highlight areas of your life that are a little bit out of sync, that potentially need addressing, so that you can be more in harmony. So if you want to do a life audit, then I have a free PDF that will take you through the entire thing. To get access to that, please check the show notes. You'll see a link and all the information you need. So a couple of techniques to try. The first one is to change your physiology. So when the trigger is happening, when you're aware of it, or even better, just before it, then stand up, move, just do something different with your body, and that will take you in a different direction. It will help interrupt the pattern. A second thing you can try is to use humour. So do something silly or unexpected just to disrupt it, to scramble it. Hey, you can even do a silly dance if you like. You might want to close the blinds so your neighbours don't think you're totally nuts, but I'm sure you can do what you need to do. So if we take a specific example, so say you procrastinate a lot, then right at the point you're about to do it, clap your hands loudly or do a quick goofy dance. And I know it's weird, it's bizarre, you'll probably feel quite self-conscious, but it breaks the autopilot, and destructive behaviours thrive on the autopilot modes. And a third technique you can use is you can remove the trigger. Now, this may or may not be possible depending on what the trigger is, but when it is something that you can remove, then this can be a very effective technique. So to give you an example, so I noticed a few years ago that I was drinking a little bit too much alcohol in the house. I would get to the end of the day and I would reach for a beer in the fridge, and then I noticed it got a little bit worse the more I drank. Once I finished 2 beers, I seemed to lose my ability to think rationally and I ended up drinking another couple, and then the next day I was like, why did I do this? So now what I do is, first of all, during the week, I don't have any alcohol in the house at all. So I've removed the trigger, because I know that if I even have one beer, that's then going to lead to a second one. Then I'm going to start to feel invincible. That's potentially going to lead to a third and maybe even a fourth on some rare occasions. So I've removed the trigger. I don't have any alcohol in the house during the week, and I just don't really think about it. And if I'm going to have a couple of beers at the weekend, then I will actually just buy 2 beers. And that's it, no more. Because I know if I buy more, after I have those 1 or 2, I'll get into the moment and I'll be triggered into drinking more. So I buy 2, exactly what I'm looking to drink. And I savour those 2, I take my time, and that's made such an amazing difference. So that's step 3, and then we move on to step 4, and this is where the sexy stuff starts to happen. So step 4 is where you replace it with a new and more useful behaviour. So interrupting the pattern can sometimes be enough, but usually that's only half the battle. Ultimately, you want to replace it with something more constructive. So one way to do this is by using an imagination technique. Whenever you imagine something in your mind's eye, you start to create neural pathways that support whatever it is that you're imagining. If you want to check out an episode where I talked about this in more depth, then check out episode 51, where I talk about something called mental rehearsal. But the bare bones of it is, when you imagine something inside your mind's eye, then it becomes a choice to you, and you're actually starting to rewire your brain. So what you want to do in relation to changing behaviours is you want to close your eyes for a moment and imagine the moment when the trigger happens. And instead of defaulting to the destructive behaviour, you want to imagine that you respond differently, that instead you do something that's positive, something more constructive. And then just take some time to see what this would look like, hear what it would sound like, and really feel it in your neurology. So again, if we take the example of stress eating, you could imagine yourself on the couch at night feeling stressed, and then instead of reaching for the cookie jar or heading to the fridge for that tub of ice cream, then you can imagine just taking a few long, slow, deep breaths, or maybe doing some journaling or drinking some tea instead, and notice how you feel so relaxed as a result of doing that. And what that does is it gives your brain a new choice, and you'll be creating neural pathways that support that choice. It's a bit like programming in a new fork in the road. Rather than going down one route, you go down a more positive route instead. Now, here's the thing. There's a key to really getting this to work well. And this is where often people go a little bit awry and they miss this key step. So when you imagine yourself doing something more constructive, so when you're imagining the new behavior, it is crucial that the new behavior is fulfilling the positive intention of the old behavior, the secondary gain. So that thing that you explored earlier on in the episode. If it doesn't, then chances are you'll feel like you're missing out on something fundamental by changing. And usually that results in you just falling back into the old pattern because you haven't addressed the root cause, the why behind the destructive behavior. So again, if we stick with stress eating, when you're imagining yourself breathing on the couch or drinking a cup of tea or doing some journaling instead of eating crisps, then make sure that you appreciate inside your mind how much more relaxed you are as a result, how much comfort that gives you. So you're adding in the positive intention or the secondary gain of the old destructive behavior. Hopefully that makes sense. And if you do this part well, then this can work like magic. You can change destructive behaviors in a heartbeat. Well, maybe not as quick as that, but certainly very quickly. So to give you an example, about 10 years ago, I decided to do something called a dryathlon. So this is where you stop drinking alcohol for the whole month of January, and you do it for charity as well. I think I'm making myself sound like a bit of an alcoholic in this episode, but I'm definitely not. Or maybe that's what an alcoholic would say. No, I'm definitely not. I've got a good relationship with alcohol. But at the time, I wanted to have a month off. And I thought, yeah, that's a good way to do it. I'll do it for charity and that'll give me some accountability. So what I did was I used something very similar to the technique I've been describing in this episode. So first of all, I explored what the positive intention was behind drinking alcohol. What is the secondary gain? And for me, it was letting go, it was having fun, and all of that ultimately led to living as most enjoyable a life as I possibly can. So that was the ultimate secondary gain. That was the positive intention. So I then took that and put it into the behaviour of being completely sober for a month. So I imagined what it would be like when I wake up in the morning feeling completely fresh, having a clear head 100%, and how all of that would lead to me having more fun and ultimately living the best life that I possibly could live. So I'm incorporating the positive intention of the old behaviour into the new way of being, the new behaviour. Hopefully that makes sense. And for me, it was incredible. I just played this inside my mind a few times. I really felt it, and I think that's key. You want to feel it. And I didn't have any urges for alcohol whatsoever. It was super easy, and I actually really enjoyed it as well. I felt fantastic for that month. So that's what you want to do with this step. It makes it so much more powerful. In fact, I think it's crucial to getting it to work. So that is the technique. Give it a go. Pick some kind of behaviour that you're not happy with, some kind of pattern that you play over and over again, and take yourself through that process. Honestly, you'll be amazed at how this can work. When you do it in the ways that I've described it, it can work like magic. So let's just do a quick review, and then there's a couple of additional things I want to add in just to help you reinforce the behavioural change. But let's do the review first. So first of all, I talked about 3 things that are worth considering. First of all, what's the subconscious connection? You want to avoid just looking at the surface. I know your attention will be drawn to the behaviour itself, but you want to look beneath that. What is the connection that's been made that's bringing this behaviour into your experience in the first place? And the second thing to consider is, what is the secondary gain? What are you gaining from staying the same? And what might you lose if you change? And how can you change in a way that allows you to preserve that thing that you think you're getting, that hidden benefit. And then the third thing that's worth considering is beliefs and identity. You really want to pay attention to how you're describing your behaviour and also how you're describing yourself. And whenever we say things like, well, I've just got an addictive personality, or this is just the way that I am, once a smoker, always a smoker, you're doing yourself a massive disservice. You're so much more than that. And the more that you describe yourself in those terms, then the more it will become your reality. It will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So be aware of it. And please, please, please stop doing it. Then we took a look at that 4-step process. So step 1 was you want to identify the trigger and pattern. When and where is this behaviour happening? Step 2, you want to uncover the positive intention. So we're getting into the realms of secondary gain. What is it that you're getting from doing this behaviour? Or what is it attempting to do or get for you that's positive? Step number 3, you want to interrupt the pattern. Destructive behaviours thrive on the autopilot mode. So you want to scramble that. You want to interrupt it. And step number 4, replace it with a new behaviour. And one of the keys I mentioned was you want to incorporate the positive intention of the old behaviour, the behaviour you want to change. That way you're addressing the root cause. So just some additional things I want to mention is, first of all, celebrate small wins. Each time you successfully do something that's in alignment with the new behaviour, acknowledge it. Positive reinforcement helps lock in the new pattern. Also, what you can do is another NLP technique called future pacing. So this is where you imagine the larger and wider benefits that you'll experience over time as a result of changing this behaviour for the better. So how would it impact your personal life? How would it positively impact your family? What new opportunities might it open up? How would it positively enrich you mentally, emotionally, potentially even spiritually? When you start to consider these larger and wider benefits, how it's going to positively impact your life over a longer period, then this can just ramp up the stakes. It gives you that desire. It gives you that motivation to really make this change happen. So that is us for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, if you want to go into this in more depth, then check out my Brain Trainers Academy. I do an entire training just on this technique where I go into it in lots of depth and I show you exactly how it works so that you can get it right every single time. So I'll include a link to it in the show notes. There's also a discounted link because you're a podcast listener. So check that out. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're feeling especially generous, if you could leave me a review, it really does help. So thank you once again for listening. Have a great rest of your week and I'll speak to you in the next episode.